to you by Penguin.
Empire: How Britain Made the Modern World by Niall Ferguson. Read by Jonathan Keeble.
The old river in its broad reach rested unruffled at the decline of day, after ages of good service done to the race that peopled its banks, spread out in the tranquil dignity of a waterway leading to the uttermost ends of the earth. The tidal current runs to and fro in its unceasing service, crowded with memories of men and ships it had borne to the rest of home or to the battles of the sea. It had known and served all the men of whom the nation is proud. It had borne all the ships whose names are like jewels flashing in the night of time. It had known the ships and the men. They had sailed from Deptford, from Greenwich, from Erith, the adventurers and the settlers, king's ships and the ships of men on change, captains, admirals, the dark interlopers of the Eastern trade, and the commissioned generals of East India fleets. Hunters for gold or pursuers of fame, they all had gone out on that stream, bearing the sword and often the torch, messengers of the might within the land, bearers of a spark from the sacred fire. What greatness had not floated on the ebb of that river into the mystery of an unknown earth? The dreams of men, the seed of commonwealths, the germs of empires. Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. Introduction. Britain controls today the destinies of some 350 million alien people, unable as yet to govern themselves and easy victims to rapine and injustice, unless a strong arm guards them. She is giving them a rule that has its faults, no doubt, but such, I would make bold to affirm, as no conquering state ever before gave to a dependent people. Professor George M. Wrong, 1909. Colonialism has led to racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia and related intolerance, and Africans and people of African descent and people of Asian descent and indigenous peoples were victims of colonialism and continue to be victims of its consequences. Durban Declaration of the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia and Related Intolerance, 2001. Once there was an empire that governed roughly a quarter of the world's population, covered about the same proportion of the Earth's land surface, and dominated nearly all its oceans. The British Empire was the biggest empire ever, bar none. How an archipelago of rainy islands off the northwest coast of Europe came to rule the world is one of the fundamental questions, not just of British, but of world history. It is one of the questions this book seeks to answer. The second, and perhaps more difficult question it addresses, is simply whether the empire was a good or bad thing. It is nowadays quite conventional to think that on balance it was bad. Probably the main reason for the empire's fall into disrepute was its involvement in the Atlantic slave trade and slavery itself. This is no longer a question for historical judgment alone. It has become a political and potentially a legal issue. In August 1999, the African World Reparations and Repatriation Truth Commission, meeting in Accra, issued a demand for reparations from all those nations of Western Europe and the Americas and institutions who participated and benefited from the slave trade and colonialism. The sum suggested as adequate compensation, based on estimates of the number of human lives lost to Africa during the slave trade, as well as an assessment of the worth of the gold, diamonds, and other minerals taken from the continent during colonial rule, was $777 trillion. Given that more than 3 million of the 10 million or so Africans who crossed the Atlantic as slaves before 1850 were shipped in British vessels, the putative British reparations burden
Sample complete. Ready to continue?